The story is a powerful and poignant tale set on the Santana plantation, exploring themes of envy, identity, cruelty, and the resilience of the human spirit. The core dynamic is between Doña Clarice, the lady of the house, and Rosa, an enslaved woman. Clarice's envy of Rosa's beautiful straight hair stems from her own hidden self-loathing connection to her African ancestry, which she has tried to deny and straighten both literally and figuratively. Her act of cutting Rosa's hair is an attempt to exert dominance and punish the visible reminder of what she hates in herself. The narrative's strength lies in its slow, psychological burn. The humiliation is not a one-time event, but a seed that germinates. Rosa's quiet dignity and the regrowth of her hair, even more beautiful, become a silent, living rebuke to Clarice's cruelty. The story beautifully inverts the intended punishment. The act meant to diminish Rosa instead becomes the catalyst for Clarice's unraveling, the climax where Clarice's secret is exposed, her self-inflicted violence revealed, and her eventual physical fall is symbolic of her moral and psychological collapse. Rosa's act of mercy at the end, saving the woman who tormented her, is the ultimate demonstration of a strength Clarice could never possess. The conclusion offers a form of poetic justice. Rosa gains her freedom and unshakable dignity, while Clarice is forced to confront and perhaps begin to accept her own reflection. The air in the Santana plantation's Gran Sala was thick with the smell of polished mahogany and bitter coffee. Senor Antonio, master of all he surveyed, leaned back in his leather chair, the newspaper forgotten on his knee. His eyes, usually sharp with accounts and yields, had softened, following the graceful movement of the young woman refilling his porcelain cup. Rosa moved with a silence that was not submission but a kind of profound poise. Her hands, slender and sure, did not tremble as she poured, the sunlight streaming through. The high windows caught the cascade of her hair, a waterfall of dark, sleek silk that fell down her back, gleaming with a health that seemed to defy the dust and toil of the plantation. It was hair that spoke of deep ancestry, of a lineage that carried its beauty proudly. Antonio, his mind loosened by the good harvest and the fine coffee, made a fatal error of perception. He saw not a slave but a portrait. "Y impressionante," he murmured, more to himself than anyone. "Rosa, your hair. It is lovelier than that of many a fine lady in Rio." The words hung in the air, crystalline and shattering. Rosa froze, her eyes darting to the doorway where Doña Clarice stood, having entered unheard. The mistress' face, usually a carefully composed mask of alabaster calm, seemed to crack, a flicker of something raw. Startled, venomous pain passed through her eyes before they hardened into chips of flint. Rosa dipped her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Obrigada, senor," she whispered, the gratitude ash in her mouth. She retreated, feeling Clarice's gaze bore into her retreating back like twin branding irons. The afternoon sun was a merciless judge. Rosa was called to the shaded veranda where Clarice sat, fanning herself with slow, deliberate strokes. The order was given without preamble, in a voice dry as sun-bleached bone. "Your hair is a nuisance. It is unkempt. It attracts dirt. It will be cut." Rosa's breath hitched. "Doña Clarice, I keep it clean. I promise you will be silent." Clarice rose, a pair of heavy sewing scissors glinting in her hand. They were not the fine shears for embroidery, but brutal utilitarian things. "Kneel." The tiles of the veranda were hot against Rosa's knees. She closed her eyes, not out of submission, but to build a wall within, a chamber where her soul could hide. She felt Clarice's hand, cold and possessive, grab a thick handful of her hair at the crown. The sound was the worst of it, not a clean slice, but a harsh, grinding crunch as the scissors sawed through the dense mass. Black strands fell to the tiles like slain birds, again and again. Clarice's breathing was quick, fervent, as if she were performing an exorcism. When it was done, Rosa's neck felt naked, exposed to a hostile world. Her head was light, uneven, marked by jagged patches where the blades had bitten too close. Clarice dropped the final lock onto the pile. She looked at her handiwork, a strange, feverish satisfaction in her eyes. "Agora," she said, her voice a low hiss. "Now you understand your place. Beauty is a privilege, not a right." Rosa did not cry. She gathered the shorn locks from the floor, her movements mechanical, and placed them in the scrap basket, as instructed. She walked back to the slave quarters, the breeze on her scalp feeling like 1,000 tiny lashes. The other enslaved people, returning from the fields, saw her. They did not speak. Their silence was a louder solidarity than any word could be, a silence heavy with shared understanding, with respect, and with a cold, simmering anger. That night, in the smoky darkness of the quarters, old Marta found her huddled in a corner. The midwife's wrinkled hands, which had ushered so much life into the world, gently touched Rosa's ravaged scalp. "The hair will return, mina filha," Marta whispered, her voice a soft rumble. "It is the heart that takes longer to heal, but remember, they can only cut what grows outside. What grows inside, that is yours forever." Rosa nodded, a single tear finally escaping, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. In Marta's words, she felt not just comfort, but a promise, and in the deepest part of her spirit, where Clarice's scissors could not reach, a seed of something new took root, not of hatred, but of a fierce, unwavering determination. The humiliation burned, yes, but from ashes even the most tender shoots can emerge. The persecution began subtly, a slow drip of venom into Rosa's daily life. It was no longer enough that Rosa's hair was shorn. Clarice needed to ensure the spirit within was equally diminished. Rosa would spend hours washing the same set of linens, only for Clarice to run a finger along a collar and declare it still gray with insolence. The perfectly swept yard would suddenly have a single strategically placed twig, evidence of her laziness. Tasks were doubled, tripled, their goalposts constantly moved. Clarice's eyes were always on her, a hawk watching a wounded mouse, waiting for the moment of final surrender. Rosa endured. She worked with a silent, efficient grace that seemed to infuriate Clarice further. The physical weight of the labor was nothing compared to the psychological siege. She ate little, slept less, her body thinning, but her eyes, those deep, watchful eyes, never lost their light. And then her hair began to grow back. It started as a shadow, a soft fuzz on her wounded scalp. Then stubborn, strong curls pushed through, coiling tightly at first, then lengthening into resilient rings. Without pomades or creams, denied even castor oil by Clarice's decree, it grew with a vibrant health that seemed miraculous. It was different than before, no longer straight, but a glorious, natural crown of tight, shining curls that framed her face with a defiant beauty. The whispers began among the other women, first in the quarters, then in the kitchens, then among the free black and mixed-race women from the surrounding villages who came to trade. They came with excuses to sell eggs, to deliver woven baskets, but their eyes were always on Rosa. "What does she use?" they'd ask Marta in hushed tones. Marta would smile her secret smile. "She uses patience, she uses faith, it is a blessing." The word spread, Rosa's hair is a blessing. To Clarice it was a curse. Each new coil on Rosa's head was a barb in her own pride. She took to wearing her own hair wound in ever tighter, more severe buns, as if trying to strangle the roots. She would catch sight of Rosa from a window, Rosa drawing water from the well, her natural halo catching the sun, and her hand would fly to her own tightly bound hair, a spasm of anguish twisting her features. One sweltering afternoon, attention snapped. Clarice summoned Rosa to her private sitting room. "You are flaunting it," she accused, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Flaunting what, Donna Clarice? Rosa asked, her gaze respectfully lowered. That brush on your head, you think it makes you special? It is wild, it is untamed, it is improper. Clarice stood, pulling a sheer silk scarf from a drawer. You will cover it, at all times. I will not have you advertising. From that day, Rosa was forced to wear a pano da cabeça, a headscarf. But even this backfired. Tied with the innate elegance Rosa carried in her bones, the scarf became not a symbol of suppression, but a regal turban, accentuating the graceful line of her neck, the fierce beauty of her uncovered face. The humiliation intended to bury her only served to elevate her stature among her people. She was becoming a legend, a quiet symbol of resilience. Clarice, imprisoned in her own big house, watched this transformation with a mounting chaotic despair. She was losing the battle she herself had started, and in the quiet of her bedchamber, before her gilded mirror, she began a private, desperate war on herself, pulling at her own hair, seeking a straightness that would never come, punishing her scalp for its betrayal. The storehouse was a cavern of shadows and forgotten things, smelling of dried corn, burlap, and old wood. Rosa slipped inside, seeking a moment of solitude, a respite from the watchful eyes of the big house. She leaned against a sack of coffee beans, allowing the quiet to soothe her spirit. A soft, choked sound broke the silence. Rosa stiffened. Peering through the gloom, she saw a figure kneeling before a small, cracked mirror propped on a barrel. It was Donna Clarice. Her fine dress was dusty, her usually perfect hair was loose and disheveled. But it was the sight of that hair that stole Rosa's breath. Freed from its brutal confinement, it fell around Clarice's shoulders in a cloud of thick, frizzy curls that mirrored, in their texture if not their acceptance, Rosa's own. Clarice was weeping, her body shaking with silent sobs. She clutched fistfuls of her own hair, her face a mask of torment. Why? She whispered to her reflection, the sound raw and guttural. Why did you give this to me? This cursed thing. Why does hers look like a crown and mine like a punishment? She pulled at the roots, a brief, painful jerk. I hate it. I hate it. Rosa stood frozen, a witness to a sacred, shattered truth. The foundation of Clarice's cruelty lay bare not in pure evil, but in a festering self-loathing, a violent rejection of her own blood. The envy was not for Rosa's beauty, but for her peace. Rosa tried to retreat, but her foot found a loose board. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Clarice whirled around. The vulnerability in her eyes evaporated, replaced by sheer, undiluted panic. Then, as she registered Rosa, the panic curdled into a hatred so profound it chilled the air. Her secret was seen, and by the one person she had tried so hard to diminish. What did you hear? Clarice hissed, scrambling to her feet, hastily trying to repin her hair, her fingers fumbling. Nothing, Doña Clarice, Rosa murmured, bowing her head. I saw nothing. You lie, Clarice spat, but the fury was brittle, undercut by shame. She drew herself up, the lady of the house reconstructing herself over the fissures. You will forget whatever you think you saw, if you speak a word, to anyone. She left the threat hanging, but its power was diminished. The balance had shifted irrevocably. Rosa now held a truth, and Clarice knew it. She swept past Rosa, leaving behind the scent of rosewater and despair. Rosa remained in the dusty storehouse, her heart pounding. She felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness. The monster had a name, and it was pain. She understood now that every lash from Clarice had been a misdirected blow aimed at the mirror. But understanding did not erase the scars. It only made the weight of her own dignity feel heavier and more necessary to carry. The secret, once exposed to air, began to poison Clarice from within. She became a ghost in her own home, pacing the halls, her eyes fever-bright. The sight of Rosa calm, scarved, moving with that unassailable grace was a constant torture. She saw the knowing in Rosa's eyes, not a slave's deference, but a woman's comprehension. Her obsession turned inward. The maids would find strands of her hair on the pillow, in her brush, wrapped around the bedpost. Her scaly showed red, irritated patches. She refused most meals, existing on a diet of resentment and fear. The catalyst for the final unraveling arrived in the blustering form of Senor Antonio's brother, Tio Vicente, a coarse, mean-spirited man who nursed a grievance against his brother's success. He arrived unannounced, already deep into his rum. A tense dinner was served. Rosa, head covered, helped to serve. Vicente, his gaze bleary, watched Clarice pick at her food. A cruel smirk spread across his face. Still trying to tame the jungle, eh, Clarice? He slurred, his voice loud in the quiet room. I remember your mother, good woman, had the same problem. Spent a fortune on those Portuguese straightening irons. Seems the root was too strong even for fire. Antonio froze. Vicente, that is enough. But the dam was broken. Vicente laughed, a nasty spluttering sound. Oh, come now, brother. We all know the story. Her grandfather was that Angolan foreman old man Santana was so fond of. The blood will tell. Always does. Look at her. She's fighting a war with her own head. Clarice made a sound like a wounded animal. She stood, her chair screeching back. Get out, she screamed, her voice shattering. Get out, why does the truth burn? Vicente taunted. Is that why you're so fixated on this one? He gestured rudely at Rosa. Because her hair accepts what it is, and yours torments you? Something in Clarice snapped. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crystal decanter, and hurled it. It missed Vicente, but shattered against the wall behind him, a shower of glass and liquor. A sharp shard flew and sliced a deep gash across his forearm. He roared in pain and shock, blood instantly welling and dripping onto the pristine tablecloth. Chaos erupted. Antonio shouted for help. Clarice stood trembling, staring at the blood, then at her own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. Her eyes found Rosa's across the room. In that moment, there were no masks, only raw, unbearable truth. Her secret was now public, her violence laid bare, and the woman she had victimized was the sole witness to her complete and utter ruin. Rosa did not flinch. She held the gaze for a second that felt like an eternity, then quietly moved to fetch rags and water, not for Vicente, but to clean the mistress' mess. The action, so full of silent, devastating dignity, was the final blow. Clarice crumpled, sobbing uncontrollably, as the foundations of her life crumbled to dust around her. A storm gathered on the horizon, mirroring the tempest within the big house. Clarice, unhinged by the exposure and humiliation, fled. She ordered a horse saddled and, against the protests of a terrified groom, rode out into the gathering gloom, driven by a blind need to escape her own reflection. Rosa, seeing the reckless departure from the yard, felt a cold dread. It was not concern for the woman, but a premonition of tragedy. Moments later, as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, a panicked whinny and a sickening thud echoed from the mud-slick road. Rosa was the first to run, her skirts clutched in her hands, the rain plastering her headscarf to her skull. She found Clarice lying in the mire, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle, the fine riding habit torn and filthy. The lady's eyes were open, wide with pain and shock. For a heartbeat they simply looked at each other, the enslaved and the enslaver, the tormented and the tormentor, both brought low by the same storm. Then Rosa knelt in the mud. Without a word, she used her own scarf to staunch a cut on Clarice's brow, her movements firm and gentle. "Why?" Clarice whispered, rainwater and tears mixing on her face. "Why would you help me?" Rosa met her gaze. "Because a soul is in pain," she said simply, "and I am not you." With superhuman effort, and with the help of others who had now arrived, Rosa helped carry the broken mistress back to the house. It was an image no one would forget, the revered Rosa, a pillar of muddy strength, bearing the weight of her persecutor. The convalescence that followed was a silent revolution. Antonio, his eyes opened by the ugliness of the revelation and the beauty of Rosa's mercy, sat by his wife's bed. "She saved your life," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She has more honor in her smallest finger than this house has seen in generations. It ends now." Rosa was summoned. Antonio did not speak to her from his chair of authority, but stood. In his hand was a document. "Your letter of manumission," he said. "It will be processed. You are free." Rosa took the paper. Her hands did not tremble. She felt not a surge of joy, but a profound, deep settling, as if her spirit was finally landing in a place prepared for it long ago. Later she entered Clarice's room to bring tea. Clarice, propped on pillows, her own hair finally loose and unrestrained around her shoulders, looked at her. The hostility was gone, replaced by a hollow, exhausted awe. "I am sorry," Clarice breathed, the words foreign and painful on her tongue. Rosa placed the tray down. She looked at the free, curly hair framing Clarice's pale face. "Your hair is beautiful, Doña Clarice," she said, and it was not a courtesy, but a quiet, profound truth. "It is a part of you. To hate it is to hate your own breath." She left then. She walked out of the big house, across the yard, and into the quarters not as property, but as a woman soon to be free. The people gathered around her, not with cheers, but with a deep, reverent silence. Marta touched her face, her eyes shining. On the veranda, Clarice watched her go. She raised a trembling hand to her own hair, feeling its texture, its reality. For the first time she did not feel the urge to tear at it. She felt, perhaps, the first faint stirrings of acceptance. The envy had not just cut Rosa's hair, it had cut Clarice off from her own soul, and the woman she had tried to break had shown her the only path back, a path of brutal honesty, and the terrifying, liberating act of making peace with one's own reflection. Rosa's hair grew, a glorious, untamed testament to resilience. Her story grew too, whispered from plantation to village, a testament that the deepest roots of identity, of strength, of mercy, can never be cut. They can only grow stronger, waiting for the day they finally break into the sun. If this story of resilience and the unbreakable human spirit moved you, please share this video and subscribe to Tales of Slavery for more powerful journeys into the forgotten corners of history. Your support helps us keep these important narratives alive. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from.